Hola amiguitos, ¿cómo están? My name is Cynthia Flores. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am also the host of the Heal and Manifest podcast. And on today's live, me and Luis Cornejo, who is also a sex therapist, he is a model and a speaker and a consultant. We are going to be talking about a very important topic. So I hope everyone who is joining in, Luis, I see you. There you go. Going to be talking about something that is not quite discussed, but we see it a lot, obviously, on social media. It's up in our faces. Hey, how
Hey,
are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Great. I'm great. So, everyone who is joining, of course, we are going to be talking about this is going to be a crossover podcast episode.
Mhm.
Hopefully, everything goes well when we download everything and we're doing the editing. But it's going to be on our liberation, and bodies should not be a source of violence. And Luis, I'll let you take over in terms of presenting this, how this all started. But of course, as I was mentioning earlier before you joined, Luis, is that we talk so much about our bodies. There's a lot of conversation, maybe not conversations, but we see how body autonomy just kind of shows up in social media, right? And how we talk a lot about liberation, at least people who are in this field, right? As therapists, people that are working on liberation and freedom of expression. But it's something that we don't really sit down and have any dialogues with people. So I wanted you to kind of take the lead on this conversation and then we can get started.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thank you, Cynthia, for agreeing to be on this, talk about liberation and also body autonomy and just talking overall about the mental health aspects, right? When it comes to our bodies, when it comes to autonomy of our bodies, and also how different things impact, right? That aspect of our mental health, right? Whether it is political or social, religious, because all of it impacts, right? The way that we see our bodies, the way that we also engage socially. And so they're very important topics and they can definitely be very complex. I will say this is not a all-inclusive chat. So, we're here to introduce a bit about it, talk about it openly, and also, I encourage folks to um, seek resources, right? I'm sure we'll be able to add some stuff for people to take a look at, but there's so much to know and learn about this topic in particular. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Luis Cornejo, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified sex therapist. I co-own a fully virtual practice out here in California called Psychosocial Therapy, where we specialize on queer and BIPOC mental health. I'm also a model and work in fashion with various designers and have my own podcast, Queer Magic, which this is the crossover with Cynthia's podcast. And a lot of my work is centered around education, right? And helping answer questions that folks might have about all aspects of mental health, but particularly sex. Right. And when I say sex, I'm not just talking about the physical act of sex. I'm talking about our bodies, our pleasure, our body autonomy, right? And so a lot of different aspects that come with the conversation around our bodies, which is interesting because I don't think many people realize that, right? When we're thinking about sex, it's like a normal biological. I mean, obviously, depending on what you've learned and how you've been brought up, you're going to have biases, assumptions, beliefs, knowledge about different aspects of sex. And so many times we don't get a full picture, right? And so that's why we're here. We're here to talk a little bit more openly about it. And what actually brought about this conversation, funny enough, was a clip that I shared on my channel. I think it was yesterday with Cristina, who many of you will probably know, right? She was the Oprah on Univision, right? Our version, and definitely someone that many of us grew up watching, right, in the talk show, broke a lot of barriers, right, had a lot of topics that were very important on the show. Um, and this is someone that, has been off the air for a while now, but still does a lot of conversations, does a lot of talks about their own experience. And so the clip in question, and I'll share it again on my profile later on after this talk so that people can watch it, but she's basically talking to Don Francisco, right? Another person that many of us grew up watching on Sábado Gigante on Saturdays. Which, if you're familiar, you know the show, right? I mean, this was a very interesting pairing to begin with because Don Francisco's show definitely had a lot of sexualization, a lot of aspects of women in specific uniforms or for specific reasons, right, along in the show. And he's talking to Christina, and she's basically going on about the industry, her experience, and how she was a bit critical, I would say, that at least that's how it came off in terms of women now in the present day. She specifically was referring to how so many women are talented, so many women, have a lot to offer, and yet they're showing their bodies, they're, shaking their ass on the stage, whatever, right? And she kind of goes into this idea that, I didn't have to do that, and I learned how to respect myself, and I learned how to have men respect me, especially Latino men. And she talks about how she was widely successful. And the reason why I think that clip activated something for me was a personal experience that I'll share about a little bit later. But ultimately, it was really the messaging right behind it. That it was a very loaded message, and it's something that many of us, especially us BIPOC folks and Latinos, have heard numerous times. Right? Si quieres que te respeten, if you want to be respected, as women, right? I'm talking about women specifically. You need to like dress up a certain way. You can't show your body. You can't have figure hugging clothing. You can't act or engage in certain behaviors because it's, people are going to not respect you. And so this is something that many of us hear, even men, right? I remember growing up and hearing a lot of the women in my family say this to cousins, to women in my family about how they were supposed to show up and present themselves. Men got a lot more slack, right? Many of us know. No one ever said to men, you should dress this. The only time you ever heard it was pull your pants up. Right? A lot of the guys, but it was never as stigmatized as it was with women. And so a lot of us experience this, right? When we're growing up, we hear a lot of the double standards that come with our bodies as men and women. And obviously, we also have to talk about non-binary queer folks, but specifically, right, in gender role, the aspect of gender role, that's what we hear. And so when I was hearing this, I was kind of sitting there like, oh my gosh, it sounds a lot like my mom or my aunt or a lot of the older women in my life who often shamed or even stigmatized, my younger cousins, my nieces, way of dressing or the way that they showed up in the world. And so it was really activating for me in a lot of ways. One specifically, because I also think about myself as a queer person.
Mhm.
And the gender roles affect all of us, right? I mean, this is the reality. It's not about, this only affects one group or the other. It really is very broad and very complex. Cynthia, I don't know if you want to add anything specifically about gender roles, because I know that you talk a lot about that as well. So I want to.
Yeah, I was just thinking about as you were talking about Christina and how she was talking about in this clip that you shared, that she learned to respect herself. And I think a lot about the different generations, right? Our parents, our tias, our grandparents, great grandparents, like they grew up in with internalizing a lot of shame. And I have a lot of these conversations with my clients, men and women and queer folks around shame, because we understand that shame, what it does is that it's this belief that somehow, regardless of there, it does feel like it's a double standard, because no matter what we do, si hacemos las cosas de una manera de otra, it's like we're going to be shamed regardless, depending on how we look, how we dress, how we portray ourselves, how we're perceived. So I think a lot about, as you were talking about gender roles, it does impact absolutely everyone.
Yeah,
And it starts
absolutely.
from when we're little, right? How the beliefs that we hold on that are pretty much rooted in cultural, like societal, as you know, beliefs that are also rooted in the purity culture that you talk a lot about. And I came into this episode, this episode, this conversation, thinking, how do I how do I come into this conversation without being bashing like or religion, because I do believe that in a certain way, I'm still finding my spirituality. I've been looking for that and searching for God in my relationship with God, and everyone is in their own way. But at the same time, there's a lot of, for me, it goes beyond the institution, whatever institution is out there. My relationship with God, and also my relationship with my body, right? Because I think if you think a lot about, purity culture and the messaging that comes out of it, I question him. I've always been a very much a critical thinker. I'm always questioning. I'm always asking why. ¿Por qué esto? ¿Por qué otro? So one of the things that comes out a lot, and is pretty much reinforced for women, right? When it comes to purity culture around, hey, you have to dress modest. You have to dress in a certain way. You have to cover your body. You have to, not show this because somehow that's lustful. And I'm like, excuse me? Like, yo así como que, wow, o sea, where's
And I
it
think
coming?
it's very dehumanizing,
And it's
right? It's very dehumanizing for women because at the end of the day, what you're really saying with purity culture is you're only allowed to enjoy your body or even to show up in a sexual way as a functional existence, right? To get pregnant, to please your husband. And so these concepts get ingrained and it is very dehumanizing, right? It tells women you are not allowed to want pleasure. You are not allowed to want to feel sexy. You're not allowed to give your body, these pleasures that are very natural, right? And so I think when we're talking about purity culture, we have to acknowledge that there's a historical context to it, right? It's very religious embedded. It's also colonization. It's also very patriarchal, right? Around the idea of how women specifically, right? Because and that's the thing that when we say purity culture, we're not talking about men as well. Most men, I mean, I didn't hear it. I don't know if you did, but I don't recall men being told like, oh, you shouldn't have sex, or oh, your body is this, or oh, if this happens, then you're no longer good, or there's something wrong with you, or you're damaged. I heard so much of that aimed towards women, and men were almost like excused from the idea of purity.
exactly. No, yeah, and that's the same narrative. And imagine, as in these times, in these modern times where literally we see sex in front of our faces, like we see it being sold on social media. Like if you show, honestly, not por nada, but when I show at least a little bit of skin, like a little bit of like showing off, I get more views, I get more likes, and it's like, wow, it makes me in like I have the capacity and ability to psychologically and critically think about these things, but little kids, teenagers, people that maybe don't have the awareness or the self-awareness about the impacts, like of course it's going to sell, and it's going to subconsciously impact them, their self-esteem, their self-concept, their the shame aspects, and you're right, when it comes to these messaging, I could only imagine for us that living in this modern world and we're constantly seeing these things on the day to day, in a way we're so desensitized, Whereas, of course, we talking about, as you mentioned, purity culture, different institutions, women receiving all of these messaging, and I think about like other generations. This is why we have older generations, like our parents, our grandparents, who grew up with a lot of shame around body autonomy, around understanding their needs, their basic needs, feeling like they had to cater, to the male gaze, they had to cater to men, right? And we're talking, this could be through, the heteronormity of, these sort of relationship dynamics, but just like living in a lot of shame and like disconnection with their body.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And for everyone tuning in, thank you so much for the sweet messages. I see them. I just wanted to clarify, right, a couple words we've said right now so far, gender norms, right? For those of you who may not know what gender norms are, they're really a set of rules or expectations that are given specifically, right, whether you identify as male or female. They're social constructs in the sense that they're actually created by us socially, right? We decide on what that is and what it isn't. Traditional sense, right? We're a lot of it is very much rooted in what Cynthia and I were talking about, whether it is a patriarchal system or religion, or lots of other things, right? Like for example, a gender norm for men could be, men wear pants, right? Men don't cry. Men, have to work very hard. For women, right? Women have to be homemakers. Women have to have children, right? These are gender norms, right? Ideas and concepts that are socially acceptable by the dominant culture. Um, and so, these oftentimes are not essentially bad because I know there are folks out there who identify and very connect with it. The problem is that they're almost one size fits all. So they're forced on all of us, right? I mean, that's the narrative. We all need to fit under these things. And when we don't, we are judged, criticized, scrutinized, lots of other things, right? Shamed, guilted because we're not falling into this blueprint of what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to exist. So not only does it have an impact on our mental health and as individuals, but also it is very much rooted in binary, right? Which means that you're either this or that. And for me in my work as a queer therapist, but also as someone that talks a lot about queerness, right? This concept of fluidity for all of us, right? That no, gender norms are not realistic, that we all exist in such complex ways and we don't exist by definition into this or that. Maybe we do, maybe we need some of this, some of that, but gender norms tend to be a lot less open and a lot more specific, right, about how we're supposed to behave. The other thing that Cynthia and I were talking about was purity culture, right? Purity culture is really this concept that's very religious tinted in the sense that it talks about women having to wait for sex until marriage. Sex is really about reproduction. You shouldn't have desires or engage in pleasure. Women should be clean and perfect and white and virginal,
Mm-hmm.
pure. And this has a major impact on many women's mental health, right? Because the reality is that what it's saying is you're not allowed to be human. You're not allowed to engage in any of these things. And of course, it's going to affect mental health, right? If we're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person because I'm having these fantasies, or because, oh my gosh, I enjoy this. And a lot of times it is very closely associated to religious trauma, which is very interesting because I've actually worked with quite a few women in my career that didn't call it that and didn't have a name for it. But a lot of what was happening for them was they weren't able to be in intimate relationships. They had a hard time with connecting to their body, a lot of body dysmorphia, a lot of other issues that were rooted in shame and trauma around fear that was given to them around their bodies and the expectations of them as women. And so a big part of my work was literally trauma work, right? Was working with these women on not just being able to give it a name, but also to find empowerment within this and unlearn and allow themselves to go into these spaces that were so taboo for them. And so it's very interesting, right? That these two concepts definitely affect us because they're a day-to-day thing, right? These are just things that we have to navigate, right, in our existence, especially obviously it varies as well, culture and all of that, and age and everything, but it is pretty much universal, right? These expectations.
Yeah.
Um, so those are the two concepts we talked about, and I know that the title of this is really not is really about body autonomy and how it should not be a source of violence. And the reason why we said violence is because this is very deep, right? It's not just a simple surface level topic, right? We're talking about the impact that it has, right, around, even women, right, being able to dress up as they like and to feel comfortable, but often being told, that they're, for example, when we talk about rape culture, right, the idea behind rape culture as well is this belief that if women dress a certain way, they don't want to be respected, right?
Mm.
And so men who, in this theory, don't have self-control cannot help themselves, right? In terms of women. And that has a huge impact, right? It has a huge impact in the way that women are viewed. And Cynthia, I know you and I were even talking about this through Messenger, how you were sharing that this also leads to sexualization, to dehumanizing women, to creating this narrative, right? That women are asking for this attention when they're
Yeah.
not. So I wanted to just give you some space to also talk about that.
Yes. Thank you for, summarizing that beautifully. And, like you said, these are all like societal and like cultural concepts and constructs that we've internalized. A lot of us, it doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation. We all live in this society and culture. But it makes me think of, when I hear you say about this over sexualization, it's something that I think a lot of people and like women do grapple with, right? It's like, to what extent, and it does affect our mental health, because internalizing that shame, internalizing that guilt, that like, I shame is literally like, there's something wrong with me for wanting this. There's something wrong with me with connecting with my body, with wanting to feel sexy, beautiful, sensual, because as you mentioned, this purity culture of catering, right? Talking about catering to the male gaze, to centering our connection to our body to something outside of us.
Mhm,
And that's just like wild to me to think about. And I think as a woman myself, and even someone who is doing that inner work and reflecting in my own therapy about all these constructs and things that I've internalized intergenerationally
mhm,
within my lineage as well, and unlearning that and unpacking and
mhm,
reframing and shifting that for myself, it's a lot of
mhm,
work. But I also think about like, how does this impact me on my day to day, in my relationship with myself, in my even with like body dysmorphia as it comes up, or body image things, as I relate to my husband, as I
mhm,
relate to this like power imbalance and dynamic. It's quite complex, and it can feel a little bit weird. And I think it's important to, I just want to name it and normalize it, that I know I'm not the only one
mhm,
dealing and grappling with this, that I know that there's a lot of us out there. And I think it's really, really important to have these conversations and dialogues, because
absolutely.
if you're not, it continues to be perpetuated, right? This
Mhm,
concept around
mhm,
even just like, I see a bunch of TikToks and I watch a lot of videos, and I'm always thinking critically about what might be happening. And this concept around the male gaze,
mhm,
over sexualizing women, portraying them, objectifying them, catering to male sexual desires for male viewers. And this is kind of a phenomenon that's been happening, and it's
yeah,
intergenerational, it's cultural, societal, and
yeah.
it's religious. And
Absolutely. It's in our media, it's in
it's in
movies,
our
it's in music, it's in everything. It's just social conditioning, right, at a huge level. And one thing you said that I just want to highlight is that it doesn't matter your gender, sex, your age, your identity. It affects all of us, and even men. And this is the thing that I think sometimes when, even as we're having this dialogue, I'm over here thinking about a lot of the men in my life, right? Men who are also hypersexualized, men who are also told that sex is what makes them worthy, men who are also told about their bodies and how they need to look a certain way to be worthy. And the big thing is that a lot of men don't talk about this, right? They don't discuss it because they've been told they shouldn't talk about these things, right? You shouldn't talk about, things like your body image. You shouldn't talk about things like, and yet it's very overt, right? And even when we talk about like sexual assault, for example, a lot of men experience this and don't talk about it, right? There's a lot of shame and stigma. I mean, there's just absolutely so much that exists in these spheres that impact all of us, right? Including the gender norms. Because as much as we do live in a patriarchal society that, yes, does give privilege to men, primarily white men, but men in general, it comes at a cost and at a deficit as well. That these men are oftentimes dismissed or not given the love and attention and the care that they need as well, right? I mean, it's Men's Mental Health Month. You know, many of you might know, and we see very high suicide rates amongst men. We see very high levels of anxiety, depression with men. And so none of these, I mean, all of these concepts, right? Well, yes, we are talking about, you know, masculinity and also women and all of these different concepts. They're not separate. They're interconnected, and they impact all of us.
Yes, 100%. And I was just thinking about even how men have been also been conditioned, right, within the gender roles and the gender norms, the very rigidity around masculinity and how to putting their worth into
Hmm.
like seeking that female validation, but even through sex, right? It's like how were they taught to seek out attention and intimacy and vulnerability? Sex,
Hmm.
right? So then
Hmm.
there's like this continued perpetuation of the same thing
Hmm.
that we see. It may look different in women and it
Hmm.
may look different in queer folks, it may look different in men, but it is we're all in it, right? And as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
conditioning.
Absolutely. You know, my work with men is very interesting because a lot of times it has to do with intimacy, right? Or even what is more commonly, I guess we can call it erectile dysfunction. And oftentimes what I find is that it's very psychosomatic, right? So it's not usually a actual physical, it's a psychosomatic symptom of these same things, right? That men are often told to be performative, even in sex, right? They are sometimes very disconnected. Again, it's dehumanized,
Yeah.
right? In that sense. And as you were talking about men, right, and how sex becomes such a pivotal thing for masculinity, right? Like the more women, the more you attract, the blah blah blah. You know, that's how you're measured as a man, right? And so that's where we also see things like infidelity. We see things like rape culture. We see things like hypersexualization, right, of women in all of these different medias, because these are messages, right, based on gender norms, based on patriarchal ideals that pretty much condition us, right, to see each other in this way. And so, um, sorry, I was just going to say that from that clip that I talked about earlier, the one with Cristina, what I found, and I actually shared this on there, but I took it down because I wanted to speak it with you because I felt like it's so much more important to be able to have a dialogue around it. But my takeaway when I had shared it on my stories was that not only um, did I feel that Christina, in the end, was shaming, right, women who are showing body, autonomy and self-expression in their way. She touched on a point where she said, I had to learn how to navigate this industry of men. I had to learn to respect myself. I had to learn to not show my body. I had to learn to say no. And then she comes up with, the second part, which is where she's discussing, and I see all this talent, all this beauty, and women having to shake their bodies and do this stuff, right? And do they not have mothers? Do they not have sisters? Do they have people that love them? And that really hit me, I think, because I kept thinking about how, you know, simply because these women are showing their bodies or whatever, right, expressing themselves, I think that assumption that someone didn't love you
Mm,
leading to freedom of sexual expression or leading to that side of creativity is a double standard. And it really bothered me that she said that, because I think that for her to be someone that understands this industry and to almost like come from a place of privilege and talk about it in this sense, it just kind of threw me off because these are not things that are new.
yeah.
We saw it with men, and this is the double standard for me that when you think of all of the reggaeton, all of the rappers, they have been using women in this way for so long, and yet none of us said anything, right? We loved it. But when it's a woman artist that's empowered or a femme artist that's empowered and they're engaging in this, then it's not okay because a man is not leading it, right? Or showcasing it. And so for me, it was almost like, like I understand. And like, I want to clarify that for me, I think that this is a very individual thing. If that's not you, if you don't express yourself that way, if you're working towards, maybe a little bit more of your own acceptance of body, great. That's totally fine. I think for me, what really bothered me was almost this assumption that women who do engage in this way are bad, because it just reinforces that narrative, right, that we're talking about, that women need to respect themselves and cover up, or men won't respect you, and then it's your fault.
I do have to say that, yeah, I think my perspective as a woman, I think in hearing that, I can see that point of view. I can see that that's coming from a very deep social conditioning of shame, right? Of having to, shame even as a way of survival, right? Because I'm hearing that she had to navigate this machista
Mm-hmm.
industry culture. So for her to feel like this sense of integrity and sense of like even self-control and autonomy, she had to make sure that she had to do what she had to do.
Mm-hmm.
For her,
Mm-hmm.
like dressing modesty, like doing things with her own values and integrity. And I think at
Yeah.
the end of the day, we are all going to function based out of our own values, our integrity, our awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our conscious awareness of like, where is this coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Some people do think through that, others don't. But I think it's good that
Yeah.
we're having these conversations. And I do believe that um, you know, that like negatively speaking about other women, I see it all the time. You see it all the time. You see it everywhere. You see it on social media, and it's definitely projections, it's subconscious repression of their own,
Mm-hmm.
mirroring their own maybe experience
Yeah.
and shame.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that happens to a lot of us women, in navigating these power
Yeah.
dynamics,
Yeah.
differentials, the the
Yeah.
shaming aspect
Yeah.
of understanding that we do have a sense of autonomy, but to what point, to what extent? Because going back to this male-centered society and culture that we live in and that we see online, is like for me, I often think about, well, even as I post like a basic regular picture of me, I do become a little bit self-conscious. I'm like, what
Yeah.
is the purpose? Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
So I know I'm not the only one who feels that
Yeah.
way because
Yeah.
an internalized shame.
Yeah. And
That
let me ask you a question,
yeah.
Cynthia, because as you're going into this topic, do you feel, now you personally, right, as a woman, and do you feel that women can be just as or more critical than men when it comes to women self-expressing or their bodies?
I think so, and it goes back to the negative, this patriarchal, purity culture, society, and all the suppression and the repression that we've had to deal with. Even like the historical generational trauma that we're still, and the social conditioning that we're still healing from. So I definitely do see that women are definitely way more critical about women than men are, you
Yeah.
know and it goes back to reinforcing that whole centering, you know centering others, and not centering our body autonomy, our freedom, our liberation, our self-expression.
Yeah.
And I do believe that personally, it's complex because uh, I don't necessarily feel like I have to show a lot to, to be myself, to be,
Hmm.
everyone's going to be different. Everyone is going to be in their own unique pathway, journey of freedom, of liberation. But I do have to say that it's unfortunate that the more that you show,
Hmm.
the more that you're going to be over sexualized. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate that there's going to be like, you're mainly going to be seen as that. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate that that's the narrative and the dynamic that
Yeah.
society we live
Yeah.
in.
And Christina's not the first person or celebrity that I've heard share their experiences. I've seen even from, for example, Scarlett Johansson, right, talking about how she would get questions about her body and dieting and type of underwear she wore for like the outfits, and the men never got any of those questions. right? They were often almost asked about like their role, their experience, their thoughts about the story. But a lot of the women would get these other questions around like, oh, who did you think was the cutest? Or, oh, what kind of underwear were you wearing? Or, oh, what did you have to eat, or not eat when you were rehearsing for this, right? Almost like very centered on the physical part, right? The body, and not the experience or thought or intelligence, right? As women, and this happened a lot, right? And the interesting thing is that I'm talking about like a lot of white women, right, who do have privilege. Now, when we talk about women of color, right, I mean, that's a whole other thing as well because intersectionality.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we're so fetishized, we're so, overly sexualized, exotic,
Mhm,
and that goes back to, history.
mhm,
Goes back to history. But yeah, it's complex, and thank you everyone who is joining. If any of you have any questions or any
yes.
thoughts, opinions, feel free to put them in the comments. But I guess one of the questions as that I have is for you, Luis, or for anyone, is like, how do we start, ensuring that we obviously respect people's bodies'
Mhm,
autonomy?
mhm,
How do we start, like breaking these cycles, or like
mhm,
maybe reflecting and being more critical and
mhm.
understanding about some of the societal and social conditioning, but also, you know, and
Mhm.
fight.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think for me, it always goes back to the self, right? It's the reflective questions, right? What comes up for me as an individual, right? And I often, when I work with folks for the first time and I'm, practicing sex therapy, I'll often ask them from the beginning, what did you learn about sex? From who? What were your earliest experiences, your earliest awareness? Did anyone talk to you about this? Did you feel confused? Because the reality is that all of us come into this world without this knowledge and we learn it along the way. Many of us don't exactly get the best education, right? Our parents are not available in that way to share this with us because many of them don't know either, right? They're going based off the same things that we're talking about. Sex is bad, don't have it till you're married, you're gonna get pregnant, you're gonna get STI. That's it, right? It's the very punitive, negative aspects of it rather than, oh yeah, I mean, of course there's some people, but it's more rare to hear people share that they had positive early experiences learning and understanding sex. And so for me, my question is always, how does this impact you, right? Knowing this, that we're not just simply talking about sex, the act, we're talking about our bodies, right? And when it comes to body autonomy, the definition of body autonomy is really our sense of ownership and control to best decide what we need for our bodies. And this is constantly under attack, whether it is abortion rights, whether it is gender affirming care, whether it is, our ability to make decisions and choices about our own health and physical wellness. All of these things are constantly debated, are constantly thrown out into the political space. And so, these things all intersect right in that way. And so for me, I'm always thinking like, okay, we have to start with ourselves and then broaden out, right? Like, how has this impacted me? And the reality is that many of us might not have known a lot of what we just talked about, or maybe you did, but haven't really sat with those questions, right? That, oh, well, I learned, that sex was for fun. Okay, great. You know, how do you how do you take that information and understand the complexities, right? That sex isn't just something we do privately, it's something that's utilized because of our humanity, right? Like you were saying, it's in mainstream media, it's everywhere, right? We can just look out at an ad and it is very sexualized because it is a very natural part of being human, right? And yet it's utilized as a form of capitalism, right? Let's sell you this hamburger because I don't know, some supermodel or some hot, football player was eating this hamburger with bacon. So now we're like, oh my gosh, like that's attractive, whatever, And so, I mean, these things are, like I said, conditioned. And so I think it's important for us to really ask ourselves, how has this played out and showed up in my life? And what are some of the things that affect me? And for a lot of women, I think it's a lot easier because we see it constantly, right, around the decisions and things that we're able to make with our with their bodies, but also for men, right, as well. I mean, all of us. And so I think that's a good place to start. Another one is just getting that education right? Asking questions, being able to have these open dialogues. Also, how this has impacted relationships for us, right? Our relationships with other people, our ability to to have intimacy, to show connection, right? Our own relationship with our body. What have we been told about our bodies? Um, lots of different places to start. But I think it's really out of curiosity, right? And that desire to want to learn is always very helpful. And these are some complex topics too. I mean, they're not straightforward. There's definitely a lot of layers to all of them, and they're all interconnected.
Yes, thank you for all of those tips, Luis. I think that some things that I would like to share is to really start, as you mentioned, start with yourself. How is this impacting you? And I go back to like the male gaze and the which is centering men, centering the male gaze. It's like how do we recenter ourselves
Hmm.
and reclaim our body autonomy, reclaim what feels good, generally feels good in our body. Like, and if we've maybe never connected or asked ourselves that, is start with figuring out like
Hmm.
what, like really what feels great in your body.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
whether it's a clothing, whether it's a perfume, a lipstick, or whether it's dance movement. It's like figuring, like
Yeah.
reclaiming embodiment,
Yeah. Yeah.
embodying self-expression, whatever that may look like, however that may look
Hmm.
like. Um, I would say that, and just think critically, like maybe
Absolutely.
have these conversations with other women in your life. If you're a
Yeah.
woman, you're a man, like, I don't know. I'm sure you probably have
Yeah.
a partner who is a woman or somebody's,
Yeah.
I don't know, mother. Ask
Yeah.
for, like,
That's exactly, Cynthia, I was just going to say that I think that's so important, right? Because we also have to think about how do we treat other people, right? Especially women. How are women treating other women? What are the thoughts that we have about other women? And really sitting with that, because a lot of times we're regurgitating, right? Patriarchal ideals. We're regurgitating the social gender role, all this stuff that, was thrown on us. And so we're projecting it as well onto others. And so it's very important to think about it. If I'm sitting here, right, and let's say, obviously I don't identify as a woman, but if I was a woman and I'm looking at another woman and I was said, oh my gosh, she dressed like a slut. Where is that coming from? Right? Where did I hear that? And how does that impact me, right? As someone that may identify as a woman, to see someone else and feel like this is what they look like, right? Because we have to think very critically that oftentimes these are not things that we just think. These are things that were told to us. These are things that we heard, and they're things, ideals that we clinged on to, that we project onto others. And so it's important to also understand that narrative. And I would say also moving away from the black and white thinking,
yeah,
right? That one thing is better than the other. That, if your thing is cover up, that's just how you feel comfortable, great. But if you're also judging and criticizing and causing harm to other people because they don't live in that way, then that's where we have to start to see the limitations of these types of systems and how they do oppress other people, and the impact they have, right, on not just ourselves, but also on others.
100%. And this is something that we literally see everywhere online, like people making very mean comments of other people's bodies, like, just like really reinforcing violence, right?
Hmm.
People's
Yeah.
autonomy and self-expression. The comments around, oh, she's a slut, like the way that she dresses, that's coming literally from this internalized shame,
Yeah.
and unfortunate that people have to reinforce that. And
Hmm.
it's usually taught to the
Yeah.
kids. It's like passed on.
Yeah.
It's this internal oppression and repression of being connected with your body autonomy, with your self-expression. But also, it's so layered that you and I
Yeah.
have talked about through the social conditioning, through purity culture, through what we see online on mainstream media.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. So it's
Yeah.
like, I think starting with thinking critically, being able to have conversations, open and vulnerable conversations with our loved ones. Like, I always have
Yeah.
conversations with my mom, with my sisters about things
Yeah.
like these, people that I trust, and I can be open and vulnerable and just be curious around what are other people, how do they think, what are their perceptions.
Hmm.
But I
Hmm.
think for me, a lot of this work has been, you know, for me to talk about it in therapy, and having a therapist who is able to have these, guide these conversations, because we're not all created equal at the end
Absolutely.
of the day. We're not all, have the same kind of perspectives or lens in unpacking all of these things that significantly impact our psychology, our mental health, our relationships, how we navigate the world. So
Yeah.
I would say that I think
Mhm.
one of the things is spreading awareness by, of course, having conversations. Um, Going back to the decentering, because this is something that I see a lot. It's like,
Mhm.
don't try not to perform like femininity. And this is something that I've been seeing so much on social media, of like the feminine and the masculine, and all of these like things that continue, these narratives that continue to reinforce these very rigid gender roles and norms in these patriarchal
Yes.
systems. Like, of like, oh, but the feminine has to be like this, the masculine has to be like that. And it's like, just shut the
Yeah.
F up already. Like,
Yeah.
and then also, yeah, like really being able to do things because it actually feels good in your body. It actually, you feel great, you feel
Yeah.
a boost up of self-esteem, but it's not catered to how other people are going to perceive you. And I know a lot of that is
Yeah.
also very layered. We can go a different route with that, but just starting small, right? With that.
Absolutely. Everyone, right? Everyone, even men, right? For men to also think about how does this affect you, right? The way that you talk and think and express yourself about women with other men.
Oh yeah.
Like we have to understand the impact of that. When we were saying violence, even in the title, violence is not just physical.
Oh
Violence comes in many
yeah.
forms, right? In many ways. And so even us just talking, criticizing, outcasting, voting for certain things. I mean, all as well as one or the other. And that's why I'm saying, it's really important to move away from the black and white thinking when it comes to this. That it's not just, this is respect. Women should be respected in general. Men should be respected in general. People should be respected in general, right? And not based on how they dress or how they look or even, their way of expressing, right? Their interests. And so I think that this is just really important. And this is a great way for us to just create a better world, right? And it starts with us, right? And really distangling all of this there. And so I just wanted to take a little bit of time, Cynthia, because I know we're almost out of time. If there's anyone out there that has a question or wants to share something specific in your experience or thoughts, feedback, anything like that. Yeah, I'm gonna look
Yeah.
through the messages really quick. Oh, we're so sweet. Hi, everyone. Hi, Yessie. Okay.
I do appreciate this conversation because, I think as you mentioned, it affects everyone, men, women, children, queer folks, everyone. And
Yeah.
it's really being mindful when you are putting things out there, when you are saying things, or even in your head, like, where is that coming from? Whose
Hmm.
voice is that?
Hmm.
Think about that. And maybe that's like your homework assignment. um, But anyways, thank you, Luis, so much for this, fruitful conversation. I hope that our audience, our, communities are here, and they've really, this helped them kind of get more insight around this important topic. And of course, this is a crossover episode. Let's see cómo nos va with the editing situation
Yeah.
on this. But it's going to be on my podcast, the Heal and Manifest podcast, and it's also going to be on the Queer Magic podcast, the Luis, and give it some love, share it, share our work, support, our work, because with that, we can bring out more of these conversations and educate and empower you all, and heal and all of these things that we're here for. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you all joining. If you do have any questions or anything that maybe you didn't get to share, feel free to DM us. Cynthia and I can definitely share on our stories as well. And follow both of us so you can get updates. I know Cynthia and I like to do our collabs here and there around like topics. So thank you all so much for joining, and until next time.
Until next time, bye. Okay. Let's see how to